Hello, my name is Jessamy Carlson and I'm the Family and Local History Engagement Lead here at the National Archives. I'm an archivist and a historian, and I've been doing family history research for upwards of 25 years now. The purpose of this video is to give you a sense of the first steps you might undertake when you begin to search for people who lived in the 20th century. It doesn't really matter whether you're researching an individual you are related to or not, because the principles of this type of research are broadly the same. I'm going to talk about resources commonly used for family history, both in the collections at the National Archives and held in other organisations, and what you can expect to find in these record series. To clarify, most of the records to which I will refer will reference England and Wales. If your research area is Scotland, then it's worth checking out Scotland's People and the National Records of Scotland in Edinburgh. If it's Ireland, try the National Archives of Ireland in Dublin, and if it's Northern Ireland, then try the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland in Belfast. Anyone with extensive Welsh ancestry may also wish to try the National Library of Wales in Aberystwyth. The best place to start with tracing a person or a family is to work out what you already know about them, and then go about proving what you think to be true in official records. I prefer to start by drafting out a rough family tree, literally writing out the details of the person I'm researching and what I think I know about them already. This gives you starting points and also allows you to clarify what you do or don't know about an individual, and then look for sources which will further your research. In this example, I'm researching a woman whose service file is held here at the National Archives. Matron Mabel Whiffin served with the Territorial Forces Nursing Service, and I came across her because she wrote some outstandingly pithy references for nurses who worked for her, and I wanted to know more about her. I already had her full name, Mabel Lee Whiffin, so I was able to search for details of her birth. Married women were not usually able to serve in the military nursing units in this period, and she had continued to work for the General Nursing Council from the time she resigned her commission until she died a couple of years later, so I was reasonably confident that she hadn't married and therefore hadn't changed her name. I had an approximate year of birth. She is listed as being about 45 years of age in 1915, which brings us to circa 1870. I searched the General Register Office, GRO indexes, which are available for free on their website for 5 years either side, and found the reference for her birth. Her birth was registered under Mabel Lee Whiffin in the December quarter of 1867, suggesting that she was born between September and December of that year. Her mother's maiden name was Brown, and her birth was registered in the district of Tendring in Essex in volume 4A, page 238. From these details, you can start to track back to her parents. Firstly, search for the marriage. The GRO indexes don't offer a search functionality for marriage records, so you'll need to look elsewhere to look at the indexes. I start with freebmd.org.uk, which is pretty reliable for pre-1950 civil registration, and usually the parents marry before a child is born at this point in time. Not always, but it's a working assumption. The only male Whiffin marrying a woman with the surname Brown in England and Wales near to the time that she was born is a John George Whiffin who married Frances Alice Brown in Manchester in 1863. Once you have the index reference, you can then order the certificate, which will either confirm your findings, as it did in this case, or allow you to rule out the individual's question and look elsewhere. So now we have her parents, which is a useful cross-reference for use in the rest of the research. Because Mabel never married, and because her service files refer to her death, it was easy enough to trace her death certificate through the indexes. This reveals that she died at Cowdray House, now the Royal College of Nursing, where she was the Secretary of the General Nursing Council. Civil registration records for births, marriages and deaths are not held by the National Archives, but they are a critical resource for tracing people. It's really important to take information from the certificates and not just rely on the indexes, which are useful but don't give you all the information you need. There are research guides to these records on our website, and I would recommend that you start there. A few pointers to bear in mind. You cannot rely on people in the past to know when they were born. You would be amazed how many people give inaccurate information either deliberately or by mistake. You've heard of the term human error? This is it. Always allow a margin of error. People are complex and lives are complicated, and civil registration records are not infallible. They are reliant on people giving the correct information, and this does not always occur. So once you've started to determine some facts and figures about the people you are researching, the likelihood is that you are going to want to look at the census. Censuses have been taken in Great Britain every 10 years since 1801. Returns from 1841 include identifiable personal information such as name and address, and the returns become increasingly detailed thereafter. It's worth bearing in mind that the census is only a snapshot. It's a brilliant resource, but it only records a moment in time. It may not tell you everything you wish or need to know. For the 1841 to the 1901 censuses in England, Wales, the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man, the documents we can access are the enumeration books. It's worth noting that this is not something that anyone can access in its physical form. The census can only be accessed via digital form, usually via a commercial partner such as Find My Past or Ancestry. The original returns are very fragile, and the digital copies are much better, not least because they are catalogued and searchable. From the 1911 and the 1921 census, we have the individual household schedules. That is to say, we have copies of the form filled out on behalf of each household, in the handwriting, usually, of the head of household. The 1911 census has additional information in it on top of the standard name, address, marital status, details of employment, details of nationality and where born, and age. The 1911 census is the last census for a while to include self-determined entry in what they termed the infirmity column, which asked householders to declare if anyone in the household was blind, deaf, or suffered from some form of mental incapacity. They use slightly different terms, much more offensive in this day and age, but this column can be of much interest and use at an individual and collective level. The 1911 census also asks how many children have been born alive to the parents and how many survived. This gives a very real sense of the extent of infant mortality in the past and can reveal a significant number of children who have not survived early infancy. This column was not retained in the 1921 census. You can also gauge the size of a property from a 1911 or 1921 form. The number of rooms and the number of people living with them is also listed on the bottom of the form. Sometimes on the 1911 and the 1921 census forms, you will see 3-digit numerical codes annotated in red or green pencil. You'll only see this if the people were born outside of the district in which they were enumerated in the census. And you might see similar codes in the employment column too. Both of these relate to central listing and coding, which was tested by the team at the Registrar General's office during the analysis of the 1911 census. It was rolled out in full in the 1921 census, of which more later. It's also worth a look at the 1939 register. However, if the person you are looking for is still alive, you will not be able to see their entry on it. Some of you are doubtless wondering why the 1939 register was open before the 1921 census. The 1921 census falls under the term of the 1920 Census Act, and therefore we were unable to open it until 2022, 100 years after it was taken. The 1939 register, however, is not a census, and accordingly, much of it has been opened. The 1939 register was compiled just after the outbreak of the Second World War to provide a snapshot of the civilian population and help with organising rationing and ID cards. The 1939 register is by no means as detailed as the census. It only comprises a name, an address, a date of birth, marital status and occupation. The date of birth can be useful, but sometimes you might find that the year is out, but the day and the month are right. The register was used extensively by the NHS after the Second World War and can be quite heavily annotated, but it is a useful resource for placing people in the early days of the war. The census schedule for the 1921 census is slightly different to the 1911. Like the 1911 census, the form that you will see will be the individual household schedule, and it includes a further column under employment asking for the address of the employer. Under the marital status column, this is the first census to recognise divorce as an official status, and children under the age of 15 were asked to state which or whether their parents were still living. Age is specified in years and months, and the infirmity column has been removed. The details of numbers of children born to the marriage, seen in the 1911 census, do not feature, and the details of place of birth have been tightened up too. There is also a quirky column at the end asking more particulars about children, which was almost universally incorrectly completed. This census schedule is the return for Mabel's household and shows her living with 2 of her sisters in Twickenham. You can see she is listed as a professional nurse, albeit one on sick leave at the time of the census. It also gives us a little more information about her older sister Alice and her younger sister Janet. In addition, Mabel had 2 brothers, one older and one younger, plus a 3rd sister, and their family can be traced through the various censuses across the 19th century. As I mentioned earlier, the 1921 census was published online by Find My Past in early 2022. This will be the last census release for 30 years. There is no surviving 1931 census as it was destroyed by fire, although the various reports are available. The 1941 census was not undertaken because of the Second World War, which means that the next census release will be the 1951 census in 2052. There are a wide range of sources available for researching people at the National Archives, and I would always suggest start with our research guides. These are written by subject specialists and are designed to explain how to get the best out of these sources and how to access them, and these are always worth a read. If you're researching people in the 20th century, then you may want to look at details of the military service records that we hold. Unfortunately, most First World War military service records were destroyed by a fire during the Blitz. However, those that survive are searchable online, and if you know the unit that an ancestor served with, you could look at the operational records known as a war diary. This record is unlikely to mention them by name, but might give you an idea of what they're doing at a day-to-day level during their military service. In February 2021, the Ministry of Defence began the transfer of almost 10 million personnel records to the National Archives for permanent preservation. The records will be transferred to Kew in batches over the next 6 years, with the vast majority relating to individuals who served in the Second World War. There are some Merchant Navy records which do not fall under these conditions, as this was not military service, and again, details of how to access these can be found on our website and in the relevant research guides. We also hold quite a lot of employment records for railway companies, for example, which could prove a very useful resource if you discover someone you are researching worked on the railways. We also hold a range of court records and some prison records which may turn out to be of use or interest to you. I have already touched on civil registration records, but other sources you might wish to consider when you're researching people are myriad and varied. Most local authorities have their own archive service and/or a local studies library, and it's always worth checking these organisations to see what they might hold. The staff in local record offices are so knowledgeable, and it's always worth asking their advice because they know their collection better than anyone. It may well be that there are sources, perhaps local organisations such as the Women's Institute, or a working man's club, or the Workers' Educational Alliance, and they may have deposited their records, and the person you're researching may just have been a member. Historic electoral registers can be a useful way of pinning people down, and some of these are available through commercial partners such as Find My Past and Ancestry, which means they can be searched by keyword, which is an absolute game changer. You might also want to look at local newspapers. These can often be accessed in local archive services, but the British Newspaper Archive has an increasingly large online collection. All sorts of things crop up in local newspapers, from business advertisements to family announcements to school competitions to court cases and criminal convictions, and it's always worth a trawl. Parish registers and other religious organisational records are often held locally, and these too may be of use to you. Attendance at church in particular waned over the course of the 20th century, but you may find useful information herein. Increasing numbers of registers are available online these days, and it's always worth checking with the relevant local authority about their collections. Probate records are very useful for any period. These are the details of an individual's will being proved after their death, and lists of these are available from the 17th century onwards. Of course, this does require your ancestors to have had sufficient wealth and property to necessitate leaving a will, but these can be invaluable documents. Some of the indexes can be searched online, but for further details, there are extensive research guides on the National Archives website. Local trade directories, such as the Kelly's directories, are always worth a look. Not only will you get a feel for the area that your research subject lived in, but you may find reference to their occupation or contribution to local life they're in. The National Archives has an extensive range of Kellys on site, and most local services will have some of these too. Historic maps of the area you are researching may also help you get a feel for it. This is particularly true if you are researching a place with which you are not familiar. So I hope that this brief foray into useful sources for getting started in researching people in the 20th century has given you some ideas for how to get started. I've talked about different types of common records, where you can find them, and which sources are likely to become available for research in the coming years. Hopefully these summaries will give you the confidence to approach some new sources and to find out new things about people of interest to you. The key things to remember are: prove what you think you know, and build on the information you find in commonly used resources. Staff and archives are there to help you when you're trying to access these sorts of records. Ask them questions, and where they can, they'll try and help you. Use research guides and other resources to work out next steps for your research. Thank you, and I wish you all the very best of luck with your projects.